Well, we all know Pokemon, this big, expansive franchise. We have games, trading cards, movies, music, toys, and of course the Pokemon anime. When you think of the Pokemon anime, I take it you think of Ash Ketchum from Pallet Town. Well, what if I said there's a great Pokemon spin-off about him? And no, I don't mean Horizons, the great new mainline series. I mean Pokemon The Legend of Thunder. A television movie, or 3 special episodes of the spin-off anime Pokemon Chronicles, depending on where you're watching it. Now, if you grew up in the UK like I did, access to mainline Pokemon media was challenging outside of the movies. We had the Pokemon Chronicles box set too. Now, I was feeling very nostalgic a few weeks ago and managed to get the box set online for fairly cheap. I watched it all through and had a great time. So, as a kid, I never watched the Legend of Thunder television movie. I didn't like that Ash wasn't the lead and I refused to give it a go. Which was the dumbest decision, as I actually had a really good time with it. I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to talk about it with you guys today. Alright then, let's dive into Pokemon The Legend of Thunder. Okay, so the movie kicks off with a Pokemon battle. We see new protagonist Jimmy take on another trainer with his Typhlosion at his side. I think an action shot like this is such an interesting place to begin things. It immediately captures the spectator's interest with an exciting fluid battle. Well, from a character's point of view, this kind of situation feels like the perfect way to illustrate the differences between him and Ash. They're both powerful trainers, yes, but Jimmy seems to prioritise training with his Typhlosion over his other Pokemon. I also found him slightly more egotistical than Ash would be, in more of a general sense. His battle style seemed to rely less on strategy and more on heavy hitting moves back to back. He's an all-in kind of trainer, which would mirror the sort of fighter his fire-type Typhlosion would be too. Now, from design alone, we can clearly tell that he is based on the male Pokemon protagonist from the Gold and Silver games. Given how Ash was meant to parallel Red from the original games, I think this was a neat little note for a spin-off media. The fact that his partner Pokemon is a starter from Johto pushes this point even further, as does references and a minor appearance from Professor Elm later on in the special. Now, it does become clear later on in the special that Jimmy does have access to a full team of various Pokemon. But it seems clear to me that he prioritises the use of his main over any other member of his team. Again, this is another separation from Ash, who is always seen training his team and tries to present a fair balance of battle use across the series. Had Jimmy gotten more across Chronicles, then I believe we would have seen more from him. Not that there's anything wrong with using just one team member. I have done challenge runs in the past where I tried to beat games with just one Pokemon. Outside of his Beedrill, we don't get to see any other members of his team, unfortunately. Given that this is just a one-off television special, it was crucial that it had some clear direction in terms of plotting. Luckily, I think this one more than succeeds it. The legendary Pokemon Raikou is the focus of this one. It is one of the legendary beasts from the Johto region. Much like the Pokemon movies, it is able to tell an interesting story with a legendary being the focus. Now, it's kind of weird because it doesn't quite feel like it has the scope of a Pokemon movie, but it definitely feels grander than just an episode. Despite being marketed as a movie, I think it needed another larger element for it to achieve that status. Oftentimes, the movies featured 2 or more legendaries or pseudo-legendaries. Despite this, I think it did what it set out to do well. Following in typical original Pokemon fashion, this special features Team Rocket as the villains. Unsurprisingly, they're trying to steal Raikou for themselves. Unlike previous iterations, we don't have the usual Team Rocket gang, but instead features Attila and Hun. This is great. In the most basic sense, it adds much more world building to the Pokemon universe, and doesn't break canon by shoehorning Jesse and James in, who would have been in the Hoenn region at this point. The special featured quite a few new characters, including another trainer called Marina. Look, I get the need to have someone for Jimmy to bounce dialogue off, as the plot would become much sloppier if he were out on his own. But I just found a character to be so insufferable here. I do think that's the point though. I think she was written to be deliberately unlikable, or kind of annoying at least. I mean, we literally witness her simp after Champion Lance at one point. I will say that their dynamic is very different to Ash's with various companions. Maybe part of this comes from how far back they go, so their closeness feels much more organic right from the beginning. Speaking of personalities, I also found the way Attila and Hun bounced off each other to be written very well too. Despite the distinct personality types and differences in intelligence, I think these two were excellent. Their chemistry was believable, and I wish we kinda got some more of them as recurring villains down the line, especially as they seem a lot grittier than any other members of Team Rocket, including the big bad boss himself, Giovanni. This may come down to actual character design and voice acting though. I think Jimmy coming to Raikou's aid despite the fact it famously doesn't trust people showed a lot about Jimmy's character. Despite how blunt and forward he can be, he clearly does care for all the Pokemon in the world. Now, this is only a 60-minute special. As good as I think the majority of it is, it does suffer through the sheer amount of characters present on screen. An eccentric scientist and an archaeologist are randomly introduced into the mix, and they don't really do a lot. I mean, the archaeologist isn't even seen again after the one scene anyway, so... Even then, the scientist could easily have been cut too. He's meant to be a level-headed adult who helps give the kids advice, but I would argue they're doing fine on their own. The plot would still resolve itself without his presence. I think Team Rocket's ideology here is really intriguing. Jimmy makes a speech about being good and protecting Pokemon, while Hun responds with the argument that their own motive will always triumph. From her point of view, they have this legendary Pokemon overpowered. They have already won. In a deeper way, I really like this point. It takes so much more energy and effort to do the right thing, and normally you're up against so many odds. Logically, the evil should triumph most times as it's the easier path to take a lot of the time, especially if the person has no morality, much like Team Rocket here. Looking back at a previous point about the time parameters of the special, they tried to do way too much with the characters in the time frame, as this plot decides to bring Vincent in during the last 20 minutes. He is briefly seen at the beginning having a conversation with Marina. It is shown that he clearly has feelings for her, as does Jimmy. While I think they're a solid trio and could lead a limited series or more specials in this fashion, there isn't enough time to flesh them all out here. They're a good showcase for Johto and should have had more screen time in my opinion, especially as the Diamond and Pearl anime has a Johto arc to advertise Heart Gold and Soul Silver, so it could have been these three. Vincent does work as a thread to the mainline anime though, as he has battled Ash in the past. But apart from that, this is mostly standalone from everything else, just a fun side story. Unlike other parts of the anime, especially earlier on in its run, this feels much darker than it normally is. After being captured by Team Rocket, it is heavily implied that Attila was going to physically assault Marina. A later scene just depicts her as being tied up, but still. This isn't the sort of thing I could see Jesse and James doing, but I guess years of the anime have turned them into very lovable clowns. Team Rocket uses this purple crystal to attract and capture Raikou. To be fair, I think it's a good plot device, especially as it absorbs its electrical power and fires it back. It seems like the perfect trap for a legendary electric Pokemon. It was very predictable that the device was going to be the downfall and the escape would be overcharging it until it blew up. But I prefer something like that to a random escape which came out of nowhere. Even upping the stakes by having it turn black and create a larger magnetic field fits into its internal logic. It was handled well, I think. I enjoyed the final conflict at the end. I figured it would be quite a dark resolution to make way for an emotional farewell for the trio, but it was actually the opposite, which I was both surprised by and really appreciated. The whole thing was a massive Pokemon battle, which led to the release of Raikou. I found the animation and variety in moves to be very good for that early into the anime's run. What I mean is, as much as I enjoy the original run of the anime along with Diamond and Pearl, I think the battles are showing age now, especially compared to the XY saga onwards. So I was impressed by how well it stood up. It just ends here, no epilogue or anything, which is fine. The plot was resolved, Raikou is free once again. The spin-off special is often forgotten or overlooked, but I really enjoyed it. It showed very early on a version of the show can work without Ash. If you haven't seen it, then I recommend giving it a view. Well, that's what I thought anyway. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed what you saw, then could you please hit that like button and subscribe? It will help my channel continue to grow. I'm gonna go watch some more Pokemon movies now. I'll see you all very soon.